If I were you, I'd be very cautious when it comes to training with your own body weight, especially if you have goals to improve your overall musculature and maximize your overall strength output. So in this video, I'm going to be explaining the difficulties of bodyweight training. What's good, everybody? Cobra Trains here, and as someone who's been doing calisthenics for the last 5 years now, I can definitely say that I know a couple things when it comes to the pros and cons to this style of training. But real quick though, make sure that y'all go ahead and drop a comment down below and tell me what your experiences are with bodyweight training. You know, your results, your challenges, because I will say there's definitely going to be a lot of conversations taking place and opinions for sure after y'all hear my take on it. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing these 2 detrimental experiences that I've came to realize regarding to bodyweight training. Now let's start off with talking about what training to failure is. And pretty much training to failure is a very difficult thing. Whether you're doing calisthenics, weighted calisthenics, weightlifting, it doesn't necessarily matter. If you're training close to or till failure, it's most definitely going to be a very challenging thing to acquire. But here's the truth. I can guarantee you that most people in the gym are not truly training close to or let alone till failure, which explains why most gym goers just have average physiques. And the average is because most people just simply don't train close to failure. And if y'all didn't know, training with a high stimulus with one variable, meaning it's to failure or till failure, is the #1 driver for hypertrophy, as well as other things like mechanical tension. But let's just focus on training till failure because it's a very buzzword phrase that a lot of people throw around within this fitness industry.
Muscular failure is not the point in the set where it starts to feel really uncomfortable and your muscles are burning, your reps have slowed down and you're pushing really hard, but the discomfort is just too much to tolerate, and so you put the weight down and end the set. That is not muscular failure.
Now, after watching this clip and going back to what I previously said, a lot of people unfortunately fall within this category of not training till failure. And that's the majority of people, and pretty much allowing themselves to end the set within their given exercise that they're doing so much earlier than they should. And within this next clip, Sean here is going to break it down clearly as to what truly training to failure looks like.
So for example, this for me is what a true failure set looks like using a basic curling exercise to demonstrate. And this is a set consisting of 6 total reps. So the first rep is easy. This here is 4 reps in reserve. This is 3 reps in reserve. Not sure what that face was that I just made there. I think it's because the weight felt heavier than I expected. 2 reps in reserve, getting more difficult. I was actually aiming for 7 reps on the set, but I ultimately fell short. This is 1 RIR. Most people don't go beyond this, and they probably would have stopped on the previous rep. And yes, these really are the faces that I make when I train all out. And then this here is the final 0 RIR grinder rep. Unless I really started cheating and using a bunch of momentum, there is 0 chance I could get another rep beyond this. That's me curling as hard as I possibly can with every fiber I can muster. Now, I could continue with partials, but I prefer to do a really slow negative instead. And I'll talk more about that and show another example here in a minute.
Now, if we take a closer look at his 1 rep in reserve, you can truly tell that he was training with 100% intensity, meaning he's putting in 100% effort onto that particular exercise, leaving no more reps in reserve, aka RIR. And unfortunately, the reality is a lot of people stop at this point and pretty much call it a day for that given set. And what's even worse is that they're assuming that they're training to failure, but they're doing this on a consistent basis. And that leads to a very inefficient way of training. And just to put it plain and simply, that's the reason why you're not making results, whether it's strength gains or most definitely muscle gains. Now, Cobra, let's focus back on calisthenics because bro's clearly doing a bicep curl on the machine. And how does that relate to bodyweight training? Y'all might be thinking that to yourselves, but hey, calm down, man. There's a reason behind the madness of how I'm presenting these examples. And that is the importance of understanding how to perceive how much effort that we're putting in a given exercise, aka reps in reserve, or another terminology known as the RPE gauge. So the rate of perceived exertion, how much effort that you can exert on a particular exercise. Now, these 2 terminologies have very tangible correlation in regards to how much effort that you can induce on exercise, right? So for example, if you're training at an RPE of 10, that means you're pretty much having no, AKA 0 reps in reserve, 0 IRR. And then on the other end of the spectrum, if you're training at like RPE of 3, 4, 5, then you're leaving minimum 5 to 6 reps in reserve or more. Like that's pretty much the high level example of what RPE and IRR stand for. And don't take these numbers into like absolute consideration. I'm just giving y'all a very generic high level example of how it's used in a practical world whenever you're training. So now that we know what training to failure is and the ways to gauge the amount of effort that you're putting on exercise, the first problem with bodyweight training is that it's much more difficult to train each muscle group equally to failure.
Another issue with calisthenics is that it can be hard to isolate muscles or movements. For example, if you want to isolate your middle delts, it's hard to find a suitable exercise. While you can still strengthen them with handstand push-ups or side plank raises, these involve other muscle groups. If you're core or triceps fatigue first, it will limit how hard you can train your deltoids.
Now, with this example right here, it's very hard to isolate your muscle groups. This is an issue that I've personally found within myself and many other people who I've coached and just consulted with on a day-to-day basis. They, and me included, just would focus on the main compound movements of calisthenics, meaning the pull-ups, the push-ups, the rows, the dips, the inverted rows, the pike push-ups, the squats, all of that good stuff. And don't get me wrong, we would train those movements till failure and do a pretty good job of implementing progressive overload by incorporating more sets, more reps, decreasing the tempo just to make the exercise a little bit harder. But the underlying theme of that is we were not training our neglected muscle groups or isolating our even primary muscle groups till failure adequately. Secondary muscle groups are pretty much what's being neglected within the primary muscle groups or the primary movement that you're training. So for example, if you're doing the dips, the primary muscle group will be the chest, shoulders, particularly the anterior delt, aka front delt of the shoulders. And then you also got the lateral and medial head of the triceps. Those will be known as primary muscle groups. And then we have the neglected, aka secondary muscle groups, which can be known as the lateral delts of the shoulders, the long-headed triceps. So those are definitely not going to be taken till failure as the other primary muscle groups that are being performed in the dips. And this is a very important note because yes, I might be nitpicking these smaller muscle groups, but if you want to build a overall aesthetic physique, have that muscle and size to carry with the strength, then you got to make sure that you know how to train those neglected muscle groups. Otherwise, you're never going to be achieving that peak physique naturally that you are trying to obtain. Let's just be real here. And I had to take a step back and pretty much, reevaluate my training because I just wasn't taking into those neglected muscle groups into consideration and training them with that same intent, right? Training them till failure the same way as I would train my primary muscle groups. And here's the thing, man, you're not going to be finding a bodyweight movement that will train those neglected muscle groups till failure. You're just not going to find anything, right? So here's a quick, simple fix. You can either do ring gymnastic training or utilize the weights, right? Weightlifting, such as dumbbells, cable machine, doesn't necessarily matter. You have options pretty much to utilize at your disposal, right? This will best help target those secondary, aka neglected muscle groups. Then the second problem with training with just your body weight is once you get to a level of strength, the exercises simply aren't challenging enough. And then you're in a journey of searching for more advanced progressions or increase the intensity with just your body weight, such as pause reps or slowing down the eccentric portion of movement.
Many strong athletes can do well over 50 push-ups. In this case, the exercise provides a suboptimal stimulus for building muscle. Although there are plenty of push-up progressions available, many of these change the motor pattern of the exercise and therefore the muscles targeted.
Now, this clip that y'all just seen right here brought up a lot of good points that can be left up open for discussion. The issues of constantly trying to find new challenging progressions just to implement progressive overload to allow you to pretty much work within the moderate rep ranges to put you in that right intensity in order to build muscle, which is our primary objective, right? But let's say even if you do that to some degree, most advanced progressional exercises with your body weight either becomes a very high strength demanding exercise or high technique demanding exercise, or maybe even a jumble of both, like no cap. But more importantly, and I want y'all to really listen carefully, it's gonna also shift the intended or targeted muscle group that you're doing initially. So for example, if you're starting off with the push-ups, right, to primarily work the chest, then you start getting to a level of strength where you're like 2-3 years in, for example, and you have no other options but to do harder progressions if you want to stay at a high intensity range, but not do endless numbers of repetitions and maybe stay within that moderate range, such as 10 to like 20 reps. Then you're probably going to be doing like the pseudo planche push-ups. But then here's the thing, the degree of activation for your intended muscle groups is going to shift from being predominantly a chest-based movement, such as just the push-ups, to now it focusing more so on the shoulders, the anterior delt, because within the pseudo planche push-up position, you're going to be pretty much incorporating more shoulders because of that forward lean. And that right there is going to prove to be an issue if your focus is on trying to build, muscle in your chest. Now, one might say you can do the dips, but I just hope y'all are kind of following the nuances of just training with only your body weight and only doing these compound movements with just your body weight. And kind of like what I alluded earlier to, one can argue and say, well, I can just train the push-ups since I want to focus on just the chest and just do a lot of repetitions, whatever number might be, 50, 60, 70 or more, right? Which is true. You're still technically implementing progressive overload if you're increasing the number of repetitions and training close to failure or increasing the number of sets. But let's be real here, man. Who wants to just sit down and do like 300-400 push-ups in a session, right? And to be honest, from a mindset, the journey of training is going to be very stale, right? The mindset of training is not going to be fun anymore. You're not going to enjoy the new gains. Like, yeah, you might get a couple dozen reps here and there every couple of months or a year. I don't know, whatever that might be. But is that truly going to be stimulating you from a mentality perspective, right? To me, no. I like to find the joy of doing new movements or perhaps unlocking new strength feats, which pretty much alludes to my next point. The next best alternative is going to be weighted calisthenics, my boys. That way, let's just say that you're still trying to focus on training for muscular endurance. You can kind of tap into the higher rep ranges, but you're putting more additional load to your body weight. So it's going to force you to get stronger as well. So you're still training for strength to some degree. And let's not be capping on the gram or the YouTube video right here. There's not one person who's going to be stronger than a weighted calisthenics athlete than a weighted calisthenics athlete. So that just means that if you're just only training for higher repetitions, training for endurance, you're not going to have the strength of someone who's doing weighted calisthenics or even someone who's doing weightlifting, right? But the strength of someone who does weighted calisthenics will be similar to that of someone who does like weightlifting. All right. And I talked about that in my previous video. So yeah, take what I said with a grain of salt, but pretty much understand that bodyweight training does have a lot of pros, but I kind of wanted just to focus on the drawbacks of just training with your body weight. And maybe some of these points might be already like known to the masses, but I believe that a video like this needed to be discussed, particularly because I got a lot of questions in my DMs and just had to address it. So, hey, what do I know? If you want to see more content like this, be sure to follow me, man. I'm the Tough Fitness Guy out here. No cap.
Cobra Train, he's up next. Make sure y'all subscribe to him. He's number one out here.
He's the toughest fitness guy out here.